Hello everyone. I'm going to use this video to respond to the intro exit ticket question about the process of finding articles, but also want to go back to what Tiffany's last video, where she talked about the difference between qualitative and quantitative and how we found that that is a confusing issue even up till the end of the class. And Tiffany went into depth about explaining how a particular data collection method, like observation, could be done either qualitatively or quantitatively. And I'm going to add a little bit to that to try to uncover maybe where the misconceptions come from. Right. So the example that I'm going to use is a survey, and a survey, can, like Tiffany had explained, can be done either qualitatively or quantitatively. It's quantitative if you have a Likert style question, strongly disagree to strongly agree, turn those answers into numbers and then do some statistics with them. But it's qualitative if you have open-ended questions and then you take the answers and you do thematic analysis with them. Alright, but the misconception comes in because a lot of you will say, yeah, but even when it's strongly disagree to strongly agree, it's still people's opinions. And isn't that subjective and therefore qualitative? Yes, it's subjective either way, but the reason that we say one is qualitative and one is quantitative is not because of whether it's subjective or objective, but more related to the open-ended or closed nature of the questions, and then whether or not the analysis is done using qualitative methods or quantitative methods. As soon as it's turned into numbers and then you use statistics, that puts it into the quantitative camp. Now, so we are categorizing whether it's qualitative or quantitative by the type of research process, and specifically the type of research analysis, the type of analysis that's done. We are not ever categorizing by objective or subjective for a couple reasons. First, a lot of people think there is no such thing as objectivity in research, and so to say one kind of research is objective and another kind of research is subjective, that really would be difficult to determine. And the second reason may be the same as the first, but said a little differently. Suppose we were to say this is objective research, then we would be saying that is true research, and that would be the end of the discussion and the end of the analysis. And really, there's very little in educational research where you can say that's the objective truth. So in educational research, at least, everything is shades of subjectivity, and subjectivity or objectivity does not have much to do with how we categorize research. It's more about the process. Alright, so a second point that Tiffany made was that in this course we're allowing you to use meta-analysis or meta-synthesis, which is the qualitative version of meta-analysis, as either your primary or secondary sources in your final paper. And you might think that's just because we're being flexible, but it isn't. It really goes back to this idea of this class being about research process, research methods is the name of the course, and the methods is the focus. Right? So from a methods perspective, meta-analysis and meta-synthesis really mirror the primary research process. In a normal kind of study, a researcher might have all kinds of participants or all kinds of potential participants, and then they follow a methodology to select them to be part of their study. The same thing happens in a meta-analysis or meta-synthesis. There may be hundreds, thousands of articles on a particular topic, but the meta-analysis or meta-synthesis is only going to focus on 10, 20, 30 of them. And the researcher follows a process. They'll establish criteria for selecting articles, then they'll select only the articles and all the articles that meet those criteria. They will also establish criteria and methods for how they're going to analyze the articles, and they systematically follow that process. So in a meta-analysis or meta-synthesis, they're following a primary research process, and therefore we categorize them as primary research. We are not categorizing them by how original the information is. So like in the example where Tiffany said a researcher might use a government database that they had nothing to do with collecting to do some original research with. That's primary research. It has nothing to do with how original the information is to the author. It has to do with the methodology that the author used in coming to conclusions using that information. All right, now I want to get a little bit into the intro exit tickets. And I've got three different student responses that I want to highlight. First one here is from Casey Lee. And Casey says, it is important to find sources from those who are considered experts, ones that have been cited frequently, for example. Right, this is a really interesting question, and the next post I'm going to highlight also deals with this. And that is, do we look to experts? And I would say that what I'm promoting with Google Scholar and the number of citations does take us down in that direction, but it also completely would contradict what I've said earlier about we don't say something is good just because an expert said it or just because the research says it. So I personally would not like to look to the experts for the answers because that gives the researcher authority instead of the research. So my approach that I'm promoting with Google Scholar and citations does front the research a little bit more than the researcher, because a famous researcher could write two articles, one that has 4,000 citations and one that has 5 citations. And a relatively obscure researcher could do the opposite. And so finding the articles based on the number of citations gives you a little bit more indication of what the research community or people that are reading the research find to be the most powerful final products. And so there's still, even in this, I have to admit, I'm still a little bit going in that direction of looking at what other people think in order to help me decide what I'm going to focus on, but not quite by looking at who are the experts. All right, the last one I want to highlight is from Kelly, where she says, I thought I was familiar with Eric to search for articles, but that she learned a lot of new techniques. And the reason I want to highlight this is because the field of information science, I guess it would be called, is changing just as rapidly as everything else related to technology. And I could make the same statement that Kelly's making just about every year. I thought I knew how to use Eric. I thought I knew how to use Google Scholar. I thought I knew how to use the various tools that are out there, but it's all new. It's exciting that the field is changing so much. I started using, when I was on sabbatical, a tool called Zotero, which I just think is fabulous. I would have liked to introduce it in this class, but it would be a whole other tool to learn. But it's relatively new and the field is changing fast. The ability to find information is so much greater today than it has ever been before, and I believe in a year from now it's going to be changing as well.